Very good. Well, thank you for coming out. Third installment of the Carmelite Saints that we've covered. How many have been here? This is your third night with us? All right. Who's first time here? Oh, good. Good. Thank you for coming. So the first two installments, if you've been here, were St. Teresa of Avila, and then on Monday, Mary Pat talked about Teresa Lisieux, and tonight we're going to talk about one of the more contemporary contemplative saints by the name of Edith Stein, who will become St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. And to let you know, the reason I'm doing Edith Stein, it kind of fell in my lap. The four of us who were giving the presentations got together and we were trying to choose who's going to do what. I really had my heart set on talking about Teresa of Avila. And I knew that Wayne Simpson had actually written a book on her, so I kind of figured, he's the guy. You know? So, and I was kind of put out in left field, wondering what to do. And then had picked up a book on Edith Stein, and I was taken in pretty quickly by her life. I always like baby pictures of saints because it gives us the realization that like a saint was a child at one point, you know, and God gives us this life, this time on earth, to develop our lives in all sorts of different ways, but to have the example of the saints really should be, and they are, they're an inspiration to us. And in particular, especially the Carmelite saints, in the course of my time as a seminarian and as a priest has been really important and honestly important to my family. My brother Michael is the one that introduced me to St. John of the Cross. You'll hear about St. John of the Cross from Mike on Thursday night if you come back. But the very first book that I read my freshman year was The Story of the Soul by Teresa Lisieux that Mary Pat talked about on Monday. I was totally taken in by how she lived her life because I think her life is very accessible to us. Right? And I think in some ways, Edith Stein's life is accessible to us. Huge difference between Edith Stein and Teresa Lisieux and Teresa of Avila. Edith Stein was a child prodigy. I'm totally convinced, and even some people have said that. She was extremely precocious. She was the last of 11 children born into a German family in the city of Breslau, Germany in 1891. And I put a red flag there because I wonder, does that kind of stir any thoughts about her in a Jewish family being born in 1891 in Germany? Any red flags there? What do you think? Any thoughts? I'm asking a question. Oh. Yeah, so Adolf Hitler was born 2 years before her. Okay. And honestly, the two of them kind of will walk a parallel line in life. And towards the end of her life, Hitler is one by his decision making and his leadership that's going to dictate how he actually moves around in Germany from one cloistered monastery to the next. So she comes into this family, and the mother is an extremely devout Jew. I mean, as Edith would say, she would say, my mother's faith was unshakable, absolutely unshakable. But her mother would also say, I'm fully Jewish, and I am fully German. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit about the context of the day and just exactly what that would mean for her family and for Edith. She's born on the highest holy day of the Jewish faith, Yom Kippur, which is a day of atonement that you fast and you pray. Okay? And of course, her mother, who is very faithful to the Jewish faith, Edith being born on this day, has the sense that she's marked. Okay? She is marked out for something great in her life. From a very early age, Edith and her mother have a very, very close bond. Okay? And that bond is going to be challenged by what Edith goes through in her life. So we'll talk a little bit about that also. At the age of 2, Edith's father suddenly dies. So the family was running a lumber business in this large city, Breslau, and in a very interesting kind of turn of events, Edith's mother takes the helm of the family business, which was almost unheard of back then, that a mother and a woman would do that. And she actually is so good at what she is doing, she writes off the family debt. She has these moments where she's helping people out in need, and she has such a good heart that sometimes she's even taken advantage of because people know she's a generous person. Okay, but she's a woman in an area in a time and day where that was something that would be very unlikely to happen. And Edith has witnessed all this as a young child. The other part of that is she's not necessarily going to be raised by her mother, although her mother and her have a very close bond. And she wants to please her mother, but her older siblings are going to be responsible for a lot of the care and a lot of bringing her up in life. So she's precocious, okay? Very inquisitive, asks a lot of questions. She wants to find the truth in everything. She'll push the questions until she gets clarity on any kind of topic. And this is going on from an early age. She has fits of temper. As a young child, didn't take much to create a sense of anger in her life. She's very strong-willed, extremely creative, and very stubborn. Okay. At the age of 2, her father dies. The mother takes over the business. And one of the failures that her mother will say that in her life was, and actually the biggest failure was that many of her children, now she's the last of 11, 4 of her children, of Edith's mother's children, will die very shortly after birth, which was not an uncommon thing. I think we had mentioned that with somebody else, this family. And the biggest failure that her mother will say about her family is that most of her children did not take the faith very seriously. The oldest daughter did, but the rest of them would either question the faith to the point of not practicing, or they just simply ignored the faith. Edith was very inquisitive about the faith, and she would watch her mother and was very inquisitive about how her mother was living out her faith. So hold on to that. She developed at a very young age an incredible memory and great retention when it came to reading, so she was a voracious reader. Her world from a very young age was basically her head in a book, and she would just absorb everything. So, and she would retain it. If you know anybody like that, I know a few people like that in my life. Yeah, in some ways I wish I had that gift, but I don't. I have to keep going over things time and time again. So a great gift on her part. At a young age, she starts to talk, around the age of 6 or 7, she starts to talk about her hidden world. Something inside of her was kind of stirring, and she didn't want to talk about it. And we get this from some of her essays later on in life and her meditations later on in life. And it'll become a trademark for her that there's this stirring in her life that's causing her to ask a lot of questions, and just something's missing. It's not complete. And I've got to figure out what's going on inside of me. And it would actually get to the point where she was going through some hidden suffering at the same time. At this age, maybe a little bit older, all of a sudden she's realizing that the angry outbursts are no longer taking place, that something is settling her down. Okay? I wish I had that, because I had a terrible temper. Talk to my brothers. Probably into high school, you know? But her, probably around the age of 8, 9, 10, all of a sudden there's this calming effect that's going on in her life. And she'll say this, she said this in one of her meditations, "What cured me was the distaste and shame I experienced at the angry outbursts and the realization I had that the price of self-indulgence was the loss of one's dignity." Man, I mean, that says a lot. This is who we're kind of contending with tonight, okay? She's reflective. She wants to know why she's acting a certain way. And she's got this sense of an empty feeling or something stirring inside of her that she's going to continue to question throughout her life. Edith will manifest exceptional intelligent gifts. She's a zealous and determined student. She has a great love for languages, so she'll learn Latin and Dutch and English and French and, of course, the native tongue German. So that just kind of tells you the kind of person she is. This is her family. Edith is right down here. She's the youngest. She's about 4 or 5 years old, and when I read that, I'm thinking, there's something, do you know what's wrong with this picture if she's 4 or 5 years old? This is her father. So I'm investigating, her father's dead. I'm investigating the photo, and finally, in Google, I found out they took his passport photo and superposed it in the photograph. I cannot find out the reason for it. The only thing that I could probably guess would be that the whole idea of loyalty in the Jewish culture and the strength of a husband and a wife. And that's the only thing I could figure out. But it was really interesting. I'm thinking, like, he's dead. What's the picture for? So, but this is the family Stein. She's the youngest, and her other siblings. So you can see that there's a huge age gap between her and the oldest. I mean, some of them are pretty much adults when she's born into the world. The culture of the day, in terms of being a Jew in Brussels, Germany, there's talk of emancipation for Jews. So there's this assimilation into the German culture and its values. However, in most cases, like Breslau, the German Jews remain socially apart from the rest of society. Okay, so they kind of stuck together. There was a large influx of Jewish scholars and students into the high schools and universities in Germany. And marriage was mostly within the Jewish community itself, so there's a lot of marrying between Jews. And not a lot of marriage outside the Jewish community. Their skills and creative talents certainly contributed to society and won them appreciation on many fronts, but it also made other people very skeptical, resentful, and envious of them at the same time. This is some of the hard stuff we have to kind of go through because it gives you a sense of what it was like as a German Jew growing up in this particular era. But born 2 years before Edith Stein is this guy on the left, who we all know. Anti-Semitism is an age-old issue. We're going to talk a little bit about that at the end and kind of summing everything up. But the whole idea of why the Jews were always scapegoated for a lot of things. Religious practice, in terms of looking at the Jews was less important, and anti-Semitism now enters into more of the political arena. Okay, it's taking on more of dealing with the Jews on a national level. Jews become the excuse for the loss of World War I. If you know anything about World War I from 1914 to 1918, and coming out of it, Germany was basically decimated. And as a part of that, they're taking a look at who's in their culture, and the Jews just seem to be a very easy scapegoat. Here's the statistic, Okay, in the war, over 100,000 Jews participated on the German side, both in Germany and Austria, during World War I. Wow. Okay, so it's not like they weren't supporting the country. Okay, and besides that, they were supporting the country by their participation in the war, but people still saw them as one of the reasons why they lost the war. And what they do is they're going to start separating politically people into higher and lower classes. And we know this, like the Aryan race as opposed to the Jewish or the Slavic race. They're going to label people that have learning disabilities or physical disabilities into a lower class of people. And it's just going to continue to grow closer as the end of the 1930s and the 1940s and World War II start to evolve. And as early as 1920, Hitler basically saw Jews, he would compare them to germs. He served in World War I. He came out of it with a great distaste for the Jews. Another interesting fact about Adolf Hitler, he was an artist, he sold paintings. The person who bought the majority of his paintings was a Jew. Doesn't make sense, okay? So as early as 1920, Hitler viewed the Jewish people like germs, and he would say things, in order to get rid of the disease, you got to get rid of the cause of it, okay? So this is the kind of language that they're going to have to deal with. She's going to have to deal with throughout her life here on Earth. From an early age, Edith has this brilliant intellect and inquiry into the world of ideas. This is her world as a young person growing up, through high school, through university. Hers is a world of ideas. It's basically up here in the head. Although there's something stirring down inside that she just can't get a hold of, that hidden part of her, which she'll kind of come to understand as the soul or the spirit of God, kind of this ache that God is creating inside of her. And it's going to take a long time for her to recognize that. Her older siblings were well educated. There were a lot of family discussions which only created this sense of more investigation into life. What's the purpose of life? Why am I here? What does God want of, or not at this point. Why is my family Jewish? What does the Jewish faith mean to me? And all that. She was always at the top of her class, and whatever during her life as a student, her world was a world of ideas. Philosophy is going to become a very big part of her life. And the nature of the human spirit and the hunt for ultimate significance. She happened to live in a city where it was basically a city of the learning and the arts. So she's also attracted to the arts. She loved going to see plays. She has actually written some skits and plays that are on record. When she was in the convent or when she was teaching, she would often get her students together or some of the nuns together, and they would go through these plays that she had written down. Okay? And she was also, because of her reading and her intellect, she couldn't help but write. So there's just volumes and volumes of writings on Edith Stein and what she has done over the course of decades. Her pursuit for truth was more than just an academic exercise. It would drive her to doubt everything she had been taught, even her childhood religion. Okay. Why am I a Jew? Why is it that I have to go to the synagogue? Where is this God that they're all talking about? How can I make sense out of this God? These are the kind of questions that she's going to ask, and it's going to all come to a head very quickly. As she delves deeper into philosophy, she's looking for more clarity, more certainty. Her worldview at the age of 14 calls her to reject her faith and belief in God. The way that she puts it is that she stopped praying. Okay? Now, scholars have looked at her work and said, some people will say, well, she's now an atheist. I kind of doubt that. Others would say she's agnostic. In some ways, I kind of doubt that too. I think there's this stir that's going on, and I think she's trying to shut it off for whatever reason, but it's always there. And my other thought was, at 14 or 15, do you know of anybody who stopped praying at that age? Anybody in this room ever stopped praying? Did you ever stop praying when you were in your teenage years? Yeah, I mean, I did. You know, I was away from the church for a couple of years. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a pretty common thing. That's the time where you should be, like, being speculative, asking the questions, you know, where do I get the answers? But she was so smart that if someone, you know, tried to explain it to her, there was always another question, okay? Remember her intellect, okay? So she would basically favor a more rational scientific approach to understanding the universe. She would follow the evidence wherever it led, okay? So let's go back to her relationship with her mother. She didn't want to hurt her mother. Her mother's faith was unshakable. She had been unsuccessful with most of her children in raising them in the faith. They had either forgotten about the faith, ignored it, or were questioning it. Now Edith, her youngest, who she really, really adored as her youngest daughter, was now questioning and saying, I don't pray anymore. Okay? Edith didn't want to hurt her mom. So something happens here. And it also caused her this inner strife. And go back to that part of her temper tantrums and the quelling of that part of her life. I think what replaced it was this incredible sensitivity. And I know the last time we were talking about Teresa Benedicta, there's a commonality here, and that is Teresa Benedicta was extremely sensitive. If you remember Mary Pat talking about the older nun and trying to get along with her, you know, she sensed like something she needed to do something, you know, and I think part of like the whole understanding one's anger is this deep passion inside, because anger comes out of passion. Something replaces it, and I think what replaces that anger is this sensitivity to other people. And I think that was starting to blossom in her life right now. And she had this intellect going this way, and then this sensitivity going another way, and she didn't want to hurt her mother. And so she's really conflicted. So there's this whole debate about, she goes from the Jewish faith to atheism to Catholicism. I would say she always respected her Jewish faith, all the way down to the very point of her own death. The atheism, if that's what you want to call it, I wouldn't call it that. I think it was just, she came to a point of saying, I got to shut this thing off inside of me. I'm not going to pray anymore. And then there's going to be these slight turns that happen to her in her life that are going to direct her to the Christian Catholic faith. And it's going to be really interesting to see that turn. So let's get back to her studies. So this is where it gets really interesting, at least to me. She goes to university. She's 20 years old. She studies psychology for 2 years. And she's introduced to this man called Edwin Husserl, who is the founder of the philosophy called phenomenology. Doesn't that sound impressive? You know? So, what is phenomenology? I think I had this in the seminary at some point. I don't know, Jim. I don't know if you had it, or Ryan, if you've had it. It's a method of how to understand the world outside of us, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it's how we encounter the phenomena or the stuff of the world, and how we kind of take that in. Okay. Stein was fascinated by this school of thought and would eventually use this method to talk about, of all things, empathy. Okay? And you got to remember, she's struggling with the whole idea of God, right? She's got this stir going on inside of her. She's got this incredible intellect. And of all the things that she's going to talk about, is empathy. Wow, this is a fascinating thing, and it's going to turn out that this is going to be one of the pathways for her to what she would say is the truth. Okay? Another famous phenomenologist was Saint Pope John Paul II. He would be the one that canonizes Edith Stein. Okay? So in some ways, they're kind of kindred spirits, and I know that John Paul II, because Breslau will become a part of Poland after the war. Edith is slightly older than John Paul II, by about 30 years. And I think her life fascinated him, and was probably one of the reasons why he beatified her. We'll talk about her beatification, because in some ways the beatification was very difficult for him to do in relationship to the canonization. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we'll get back to phenomenology in just a few minutes. Talk about the Great War, 1914 to 1918, and her personal struggles. You know, she's this great student. She's this person who wants to learn. Her world is in books and studies, and she almost takes on this sense of isolation from her family and even from some of her friends. She's more and more becoming discontent with some of the secular explanations that she's hearing about life and some of the issues of life. And she could not shake this feeling that something was missing. She wanted a deeper connection with the mysteries of our existence. So this is what she's battling with as she goes into the war. Okay? In 1914, like many people in Germany and Austria, she becomes a Red Cross nurse. Okay? Okay? At a military hospital. She would treat wounds, administer medicine, and offer comfort to soldiers who were far from home. In many cases, some of them were near death. This is going to have a profound effect on how she sees things, because her world is going to open up very, very quickly. Edith always relied on clarity of thought and sensible explanations. In the face of the dying, how could she offer sound reasoning to what she was encountering? What logical argument could console a young guy whose life was fading? And there are a couple of experiences that she talks about. First one is, there's this young soldier, severely wounded in combat, comes into the medical hospital. They ask Edith to tend to him. He has extremely severe wounds. Edith knows, the doctors know, and the soldier who knows about these wounds, even he knows that he's dying. But she notices something very differently about this man. He's at peace. He's at peace with himself. And as Edith is watching him die, as she's tending to him, she asks the question, how can you face death? You know, how is it that you're able to be so calm in the face of death? And simply his answer is, I'm not afraid. I believe in God's mercy. That disturbs her. Okay? But she also has the sensitivity, so she's kind of letting it all sink in. Edith was shaken by this experience. The soldier's religion appeared to give him power unlike anything she had known, forcing her to confront the notion that there were truths beyond the reach of reason. So now we see that it's not just the intellect and reason, but now she's starting to take the turn towards the heart and allowing the heart to speak to her by saying, how is he doing this? This is, to her, this is an unjustifiable death. I realize he's giving his life, but she even wants probably to say, what a waste. But then when she asks the question, how can you be so calm? And he just simply says, God's mercy. That really touches her. Another turn, again, as Edith is tending to a man, this time this man is blinded in battle, and the man is there as she's tending to him, and he's talking about his fear of being in darkness. she's taking in his words. And Edith is at a loss of how to respond. She doesn't know how to reassure him of where he's at in life. She can't even come up with any kind of cliche or colloquialism that's coming to her mind. She's just kind of taken in by the whole idea. And there's like this connection that's taking place. And she's kind of seeing this not only for it literally, but metaphorically in her own life. So she's actually, this is where phenomenology comes into play. She's receiving something from this man. She's starting to think of her own darkness. She's starting to think of her own inner pain. Okay? So it's not just about her trying to console, but she's allowing this man to touch her. Okay? In her mind and in her heart. Pretty cool. Okay. At that moment, she felt a strong connection to his pain, a sense of shared humanity that overcame her intellectual reservations. So, you see, two major events, and she's just continued, slow little turn, okay? The effects of those she tended to during the war, the realization of human reason's limitations, she's going to start to realize that, the significance of what religion can offer. Conflict had taken away her sense of intellectual superiority, and now she was facing her own frailties and limits. Despite her extensive knowledge and experience, she could not relieve the pain of others. And again, getting back to Teresa of Avila and Teresa of Lisieux, here's another commonality for a Carmelite saint. She's being humbled because she cannot use her intellect or reason as to what she's experienced through the war. It opens up her heart to the possibility of a higher force that could provide answers and the significance that she was looking for. Edith is now on a quest to discover a worldview that could account for a complete range of human experience. Edith goes back to study after her brief period of time as a Red Cross nurse. She studies under Edmund Husserl. She begins some teaching on her own. Her and Husserl's relationship at first started out very well, and then towards the end, as she kind of goes out on her own, the relationship was kind of tenuous, and there's reasons for that. But her dissertation is on the problem of empathy. I'm looking at that. I have not read it. I know that some of the commentaries that I've looked at said it's very dense, which means it's very difficult to read. But I haven't read it. I would like to at some point when I have maybe a couple of months to tackle it on my own. But I was interested because of empathy. Why that? Well, the word empathy is actually a relatively new term.